Welcome to Live Free, Ride Free, where we talk to people who have lived self-actualized lives on their own terms and find out how they got there, what they do, how we can get there, what we can learn from them, how to live our best lives, find our own definition of success, and most importantly, find joy. I'm your host, Rupert Isaacson, New York Times best-selling author of The Horse Boy, founder of New Trails Learning Systems and LongRideHome.com. You can find details of all our programs and shows on rupertisaacson.com. Welcome back to Live Free, Ride Free, where we talk to people who live self-actualized lives and find out how they got there, what they do, what keeps them going, and what their insights are for how the rest of us can live this way as well. I'm a firm believer that this is the birthright of everybody on the planet. And so the more mentorship all of us get, the better. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's guest. And today's guest is probably, if you were to look up in the dictionary, self-actualized, there'd be a picture of this person, or there ought to be anyway, because I can't really think of anyone I know. Even I know so many, I've met so many, privileged to meet so many people living self-actualized lives. But Linda Tellington-Jones is as self-actualized as it gets. And you don't have to be a horse person, even though she is a horse person, to know about her. There's many people who know about Tellington-Touch through dogs. There are people who know about Tellington-Touch through horses, people who know about Linda Tellington-Jones through healing techniques, people who just know about her because she's a jolly, jolly interesting human being alive on planet Earth today. And I've been grateful and honored to know Linda for well over a decade and even to work together on occasion. And I've always been fascinated by the egolessness. That's a tough act to follow, Linda, where you're going to come on in a minute when I say your egolessness. But I have met a lot of well-known people, and it's not easy to keep the ego out of the way. We're only human. And I've always been a bit intrigued about how you manage that. So I'm going to be asking you about that. And then also, if any of you are ever lucky enough to actually be in the same room as Linda Tellington-Jones, here is my tip. Ask her to put her hands on you. TTouch is not just an idea. It's a real thing. And I remember the first time Linda put her hands on me, the reaction was as powerful as with any shaman in the Kalahari I've ever been with or anything like that. There's something flowing through Linda Tellington-Jones, but it also flows through in a way that she can impart this knowledge to other people and has been doing this for about 30 years or more, 40 probably. And so anyway, I've blabbered enough. I'm just bigging you up, Linda, because you're big. How can one not big you up? So here we are. Linda, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I'm very excited when you say there's something in my hands. I tell you what's in my hands that's in all of your, potentially in the hands of every person on this planet, is the realization that this body that we have, we are miracles, Rupert. And I say this because the realization that, wait a minute, do you know how your blood flows, what it is that makes your blood flow, how you can move your arm, why your lymph works, why the hormones work? We're living miracles. And it's so interesting because I'd like to tell you my story, and maybe it will be inspiring to some of your listeners who realize paying attention to what comes to us out of the blue, so to speak, intuitively from as I see it today, the quantum field. It's there for everyone. So you want to know how I started on this path. First of all, I keep this little box for a reminder of what started me on this path that I'm on right now. And I'm going to take this out of here and show it to you. I've kept it over all these years, and for my 30th birthday, I'm now coming up to 86. I'm 85 this year. And I saw an advertisement in the San Francisco Chronicle that said for $5, you can get one of the first astrological charts done on a computer. And it was my understanding that that particular computer was in Stanford research, in Stanford basement, university basement. I don't know if that's true, but that's the story that I've been telling myself all these years. So I sent my $5 and I got this little book and it says, Your Portrait in the Stars, an astrological psychoanalysis of you. And it's all this beautiful little book. I mean, I say beautiful, carefully done, like with a ribbon tied, hole punch. Remember how we did these mimeograph things? I mean, it's so interesting. And this is 98 pages. And what I got from those pages has directed my life. It's that in your lifetime, you will develop a form of communication that will spread around the world. Interesting. And in order to do so, you must learn to trust your intuition. It's interesting that I read that. That's only 2 sentences in all of those pages, but that's what I take away with me. And that's what I've carried with me over all these years. And so, of course, my question is, first of all, what communication? I was thinking it was just the year, it was in the time when we're starting to get videos. And I thought, maybe it's a way of getting my work out through video. And then I thought, okay, intuition. And my first husband, Rupert Isaacson, bless his soul, because I wouldn't be here without him. He was really into science and spirituality. And we had a big library. And I just went to the library and reached up and picked out a book. I didn't know what it was. I pulled it out and it happened to be a Rosicrucian book. And I opened it and I looked up the definition of intuition, and it was unlearned knowledge. Today, Rupert, I know, thanks to quantum science, that unlearned knowledge is available without the library to all of us. We just have to listen. And it's all here. Every thought that was ever thought is here in the quantum field. And we just have to listen and trust. So what has led me, and I want you to interrupt me at any time, because
I do have 2 questions. Okay. Question number 1, how old were you when you answered this ad in the San Francisco Chronicle?
It was for my 30th birthday.
Your 30th birthday. Okay.
For my 30th
now,
birthday.
Second question, have you spoken to anybody else who did a similar astrological portrait? It would be interesting to know what was said to them. I mean, that's in the chat.
Yeah.
The third question is, what was the work that you were considering videoing at that time? What year are we talking here?
Now we're talking 1967, and I had an international school, riding school for instructors, Pacific Coast Equestrian Research Farm and School of Horsemanship at Badger, California. We had students who came to us from 36 states and 9 countries around the world.
So back up, long before you get this thing for your 30th birthday, and 30 is a young age to be running a riding and horsemanship academy that's international, with international clients coming in. As someone who's run such things myself, I know what's entailed, and I don't think I could have done it at 30.
Well, I couldn't either. I was the riding teacher. It was my husband, Linda Tellington, who was 20 years older than I, and who had, he'd gone to Andover and
he was a horseman too.
He was also a horseman. And I have a beautiful picture of him riding and jumping, which I just came about on. And then I realized it's in this book, Strike Along Trot, legendary horsewoman Linda Tellington-Jones. It's the story of my school, written by Shannon Weil, who was a student in 1967 for a year. And she and I have stayed in touch all these years. She's an amazing human being today in her own right.
So what work were you doing at this riding academy that you wanted to bring out to the world at that point? What was different about that than any other riding school, even if it was a very high level riding school? What stood out? What made you think this is something we need to communicate? Because
we had a way of teaching riding that was logical. So we had 30 points of the balance seat. And you see, Rupert, in order to come to our school, you had to have 10 years of riding experience. And they came from all over the country, and they came with many different styles of riding. And our riding was based on the U.S. Cavalry American style of balance seat riding. And so rather than I know this was the influence of both my parents and of my husband, and that is rather than make people wrong and saying you're doing it wrong, we showed what we wanted instead of making them wrong, because some people came from saddle seat riding. They came from the jumping world. They came from dressage. They came from, in those days, for many different styles. And in the country, like Western riding was different on the East Coast or Texas. And rather than say, this is not the way we want you to ride, we gave them this choice. This is a way of, all you have to do is change your saddle and the length of stirrup, and you can go into these different seats that you want and understand what seat it is that you're actually wanting to do for this purpose. Because, of course, we also did 100-mile endurance riding. So you have a different seat for a jump or a dressage. And that's what we taught. It was, thanks to my husband, Wentworth Tellington, it was a logical way of riding.
So would you say that you were taking these riders from all these disciplines with all these different seats? And by the way, for those listeners who are not horse people, the seat is your point of balance on the horse. And it's not just your arse. It goes from your mid-thigh up to sort of just below your rib cage, really. It's all everything that keeps you in balance on the horse. But because there are all these separate disciplines of riding that are really quite radically different, there are radically different ways of sitting the horse. And each one of them is correct in its own discipline. But many people do not cross disciplines. So my question is, were you guys coming up with a sort of a neutral on the gear stick, saying, okay, you've got all these different gears you can ride in, but you need to come back to N on the gear stick or so that you can be versatile and branch out into all these things? Or were you saying something different?
Depending upon who your student was, what the breed of horse was, what the competition was. Okay. Western English, they had to, in order to graduate, they had to compete in a Western pleasure class. They had to ride a 50-mile endurance ride successfully. They had to compete in dressage and in jumping. And that means you had to know how to teach those different styles successfully, depending upon which part of the country you were in or world.
And then when these people graduated from your school at that point in your life, what advantage did they have professionally? Did they have some sort of accredited qualification that helped them get better paying jobs in the horse industry, or what was the incentive, or was it just pure personal development?
Well, first of all, it was the intent for those who wanted to be riding instructors or trainers to turn out people who knew how to dress. And we had a dress code, so you had to come to dinner in a dress. And I will tell you, the first...
even me? Would you have found a dress?
Not the guys. No, only the women. And that was a real hazard for some women. The first year we put that out, one woman didn't come to dinner for, I don't know, it was possibly a week. She wanted to eat in a room because she'd never worn a skirt. A little interesting.
Why did you have this dress code? What was the objective with that?
Well, that was the objective, to turn out people who had a level of respect and not just come to dinner in your barn clothes, because we had candlelight dinners, and my husband Wentworth played the classical grand piano. We had a very large grand piano in our dining room. And one of the things we did, Rupert, in our school, do you remember there are many famous teachers who are famous because they throw rocks at their students or they yell and scream at them? What we wanted to do was teach respect for the horse and respect for yourself and respect for other people. So riding was not done teaching was not done from the point of view of making someone wrong. It was, how can we make them right? How can we acknowledge that they're doing the best they can? And how can we, with logic, show them how to come to these places of balance and understand what they're doing?
So when people graduated from your program, what did they go on to do? What was the objective of coming?
Well, actually, there were, I think, two objectives. One, I would say to people, the horse world is a very hard business. If you love horses, come and spend the year with us, really learn how to ride. And if you want to show, you'll know how to be successful. And go to university and choose a career that will make you enough money that you can afford to have your horses and not have them as a business. But for those who did want to teach, I have in the back of this book are some of our successful teachers. And it's really lovely to hear from some of them who went on and ran very big riding programs. And
So you also taught them how to run a business and make it work for themselves professionally, not just here's the technique, here's how to be a good technician.
that's right.
Okay.
And also, like every Friday, we had during the day, they would get up in the morning. Each person had 2 horses to look after in the stable. And then we would have breakfast and have 2 hours of riding lessons in the morning. And then you'd have in the afternoon, they had a study period and other free riding if they wanted.
Okay.
And then we had dinner, you dressed for dinner. And then after dinner, there was a study period. And every Friday, there was a 2-hour test on everything to do with horses. And we still have those tests, and they're really interesting to look at them today. I couldn't pass it today. I have forgotten so much stuff. Oh my God. So it's really, it was an incredible school.
So let's just back up a bit, because you're already here in mid-career, and after running the school, you decide, okay, we've got something really good to communicate about horses and horsemanship to the world. But your story starts way before that. So let's back up. Where are you born and when?
I was born in 1937 in Edmonton, Alberta at 7:39 in the morning. It's actually on my astrological chart here. I have 3 grand trines in my chart. Pretty interesting.
What are those for those of us who are not astrologists?
I don't know how to describe it. Every astrologer who looks at that thing says, "Oh my God, you've got 3 grand trines." I don't know what that means.
Okay. It means look out world. Okay. And you're born in Edmonton. Are your parents horsey? What are your parents?
Oh, my parents are so incredible. And I wish could pull up quickly, screen share with you some pictures here, because I had to ride to school, Rupert, for the first 6 years of my life. When I was 6 years old, my dad had gone to help my grandfather. Well, first of all, we lived in Edmonton, and then when I was 3, we moved to Yellowknife in the Northwest Territory for my dad to help my mother's dad with a gold mine that he had. So one of the first pictures that I have with me is with me with a baby bear lying on my aunt's lap, and I'm standing there with my fingers on the ear of the bear. And it's so interesting. There's a German saying in German says, "So began the master," because ear TTouch is one of the big things that we do to gain trust. And so here I am with my little tiny finger that was 11 months old, standing there with my fingers on the baby bear's ear. And my father had rescued that bear, and because the mother had been shot and the bear was left alone. So we raised it, and then, didn't raise it, but rescued it and then released it. So that was my first introduction to that. So then we moved back to my father working with with his father, James Hood, and on his wheat and pig farm, because it was during the war and there was a big war effort, to raise food for the war effort. And so at 6 years old, the school that I would go to was a 1-room schoolhouse and, 6 rows. And it was a long walk for a 6-year-old. So I, with my cousins, rode our horses to school. So my dad took me to a riding stable. I remember this part. And the guy brought out a horse, and I got on the horse's back, and nobody told me what to do. And the horse immediately took me back into the barn at the walk, fortunately. And so my dad bought this horse named Trixie, and we have some very nice looking mare. And I rode her to school. And you're going to get a giggle out of this. One day I was late, and my cousins didn't wait for me. They were like an eighth of a mile up the road on the way to school. So I headed out, and then when I got to the gate, my horse wouldn't go because she had to go alone. And I gave her a whack with the reins, and she immediately turned and dumped me on the ground. I say that I'm shorter than my sister Robin because I landed on my head. So anyway, I land her home. What I remember is marching home, putting her in the stable, walking to the house, getting a clothespin from my mother's clothes basket, walking to the barn and clipping the clothespin on her ears to show her that she couldn't do that to me. Isn't that the funniest thing? So we say that's the first ear TTouch.
That was a clothespin in your ear.
A clothespin, like I'm sure
And what did she think of that?
I didn't ask her. I thought she thought, wow, this kid really lost it.
Did you then remount her and ride to school, or were you just making?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I'm sure I didn't because I couldn't tell.
Yeah. So at what point do you go from just purely functional transport-based horse, riding, to discovering you're going to be doing this as a vocation? How does this play out in your childhood and adolescence?
Well, it's quite interesting because when I was 9, my dad we moved to the outskirts of Edmonton, Alberta, which was the capital of Alberta. And he had rented a farm from my uncle, Alf, and for a dairy farm. And so on the way, we drove by a riding stable, which was just a couple of miles from the farm, the dairy farm. And as we drove by, there was a quadrille of horses in a big arena practicing. And I asked my dad if I could take lessons because I'd never had a lesson. No one had ever shown me what to do with horses. I've been riding every day for 3 years. So he said, yes, if you can get a job. So the next Saturday, he dropped me off at the gate and I marched in and I asked Mrs. Metherall, I said who I was and I asked if I could trade lessons for working. I thought I would be cleaning stalls or equipment or something. And so she asked me about, did I ride? And I told her that she had really, really good horses and some lovely ponies for kids. And besides, so she put me on a pony and then on a horse and she saw that I could ride. And I never cleaned a stall. I was one of those kids that just got to ride. So I would go home, like I'd ride to school, I'd ride home, and then I'd ride in the other direction to the stable every day, rain or shine or snow. And then I would ride 2 or 3 horses. And every Tuesday, Mrs. Metherall would have us in for dinner, the students who were really active. And we would have lessons on, bits and bridles and ailments and illnesses and feeding. She had an amazing feeding program with so many huge bins of herbs. And it was a really incredible background that I had from this woman. She was well known and she had many good show horses and many clients with show horses. So you've got a question. So,
well, you said herbs and you're talking now in the 40s, people feeding herbs to horses. I know, having grown up in Leicestershire in the UK and horse country, that there were certain old school horse people who knew the herbs, but most people, by the time I arrived on the horse scene, it was largely forgotten, and people, and the small family feed mills that one used to put together one's own horse. That was there when I was a small boy, but that had basically gone by the time my adolescence hit, and everything was mass produced at that point. Tell me about the herbs, and tell me about, because I know this must have informed to some degree your later career in holistic healing. So tell me about her use of herbs and what did you pick up from this?
Well, what I picked up is that she really knew what she was doing. And that's something that she did not teach us. But where I picked it up from your country, where you come from, is the Hilton herbs. Because first of all, at our research farm, Wentworth was, and we have these wonderful pictures because we had a newsletter that went out to 20 countries from the research farm. And he was drying sea kelp, a certain form of sea kelp, drying it and then free feeding it to our horses. And then he also developed a form of what he called vitamins and mineral mix that he brewed from all kinds of stuff. It was amazing. And we sold that all over. And the sea kelp was, when you look at now sea kelp is a really great product that's out there. But
Yeah, now it's fashionable. Yeah.
we were the first, we being my husband, Wentworth, was the first to bring that up at our research farm.
Okay, we're going to get back to Wentworth and your research farm in a minute, but I still feel we've got a few years to cover. So there you are. You're riding to school. You're riding home. You're riding to the stables. You're starting to ride horses professionally now as a pre-adolescent. What happens then? How do you? And you're still way up in northern Canada. You're a long way from California. You're a long way from this international career that you've had for the last 45 or more years. How does that evolve? How do you drift south and into this cosmopolitan world?
Well, let's see well, first of all, one of the things that people marvel at is the fact that I'm willing at Equitana. I don't know, perhaps you've seen me get on many different horses that I've never seen before and take the bridle off and ride them with no bridle.
Let me just jump in there. Okay.
Please.
Just for the listeners. All right. So if the listeners who don't know what Equitana is the German trade fair for the horse industry that happens every couple of years. In essence,
world's largest.
It's a monster. It's huge. If you think horses are a fringe thing, think again. If you think like Frankfurt Book Fair, as Frankfurt Book Fair is for publishing, this is for the horse industry. It's international, global. That's the first thing. It's a big deal. And Linda's always there. But the second thing is, she says, "Oh yes, I just hop on people's horses and bridleless and so on." I will attest to this. I don't know if you remember this, Linda. Me and Liliana were helping you at one of your workshops in Texas a few years ago. And I don't know if you remember, a really, really strong norther came in, which is a weather front where the winds gust up to, 60 miles an hour or more, and the temperature goes down, 30, 40 degrees in half an hour. It's a Texas winter phenomenon. And it goes from sort of subtropical to subarctic really fast. And it tends to send horses absolutely nuts. And there was this very, very, very flighty Egyptian Arab mare who was there, not human, but horse. And for those in the horse world, they know that's at best, it can be a somewhat dangerous horse to get on. This horse was going a little bit nuts. The owner couldn't really control it. And we thought, oh, well, I'm sure Linda will probably just take that one out and go back to the box. No, Linda, aged probably at that point 78 or so, just gets on in this high wind with this horse who's clearly losing it. And the horse ceases to lose it. And I remember my wife, Ileana, and I looking at each other going, oh, that's a horsewoman. Okay, so it's not something that's, for those of you who are not horsey, that's not something people do. Not if you want to stay out of hospital. So, okay, we rewind. I just need to. So you're saying, okay, people often remark on the fact that it's remarkable that you get up on these horses without a bridle. Yes, it is true. Go on.
So my background for that is this stable, Mrs. Alice Metherall, because she had many people with really beautiful horses, but they didn't have the confidence to show in the Edmonton Spring Horse Show. And the Edmonton Spring Horse Show was like Madison Square Gardens.
Okay.
It started on one Saturday and went every day from 8 a.m. till 11 at night with classes. And in those days, we had horses it wasn't unusual to have 40 horses in a pleasure class. And of course, that many in jumping and all that. So it was my job, because I was the kid who was there every day riding like 2 or 3 horses after school in no arenas, you all. I mean, you had to be, I've been described as tough as a boiled owl. And I think that comes from riding in the dark in the snow. We had a few lights out there, but it was not pleasant, but it was really an amazing thing riding all these different horses from the Metherall group of horses and from clients. And so they'd take a horse to a horse show, and I would have 10 minutes to get on that horse and get it ready to go in the class. And I won way more than my share. And I know why, Rupert. I didn't go in to win. When I got on that horse, my message to the horse, and I realize today we can talk about energy because we know what energy is. And I want to talk about that in a minute. But I would give the horse the impression, what can we do together in this time that we have that will give you as much joy as I am having of being with you. That was my,
Just
that was
repeat that. That
that,
I just
yeah.
did a double take. Repeat that. Your message to the horse.
That I wanted this horse to know that I wanted the horse to have as good a time with me, whatever we were going to do together, as I would have with that horse. So it wasn't about me. That's where the egoless comes in. And that's a practice, Rupert. It's not that I get on, I'm going to show this horse what to do. No, we're going to go in and do something here together in this group of horses. And my mother was very important because my mother would sit on the edge of the arena. And I remember her like almost every time I come around, smile, dear, smile. And she had no idea that when you smile, when you're on a horse or anytime you smile, you activate the feel-good hormone, the serotonin. The horse feels that. That's been shown through these, this research that's been done with the mirror neurons, how we mirror this feeling, and it activates that part of the brain that feels good. So the horse feels good too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually my standard go-to when I get on a young horse that I'm afraid of, because I secretly am quite afraid quite often when I get on clients' horses. I do that. I plaster this big old grin on my face and it works. I'm like, suddenly my body relaxes and the horse is like, oh, this isn't so bad. And I'm like, and then it isn't. Absolutely. But where did you get this from? So this inner message that you're saying to the horse, let this be as joyful for you as I would like it to be for me. Was that a decision? Was that something you'd overheard? Was that part of some system of ethics that was talked about by a mentor or someone you looked up to? Or was that something more intuitive and innate, or was it some combo?
What comes to my mind when you ask me that question is my great uncle standing with me in the stable when I was given a book. So first of all, go back to Mrs. Metherall, and the way she started horses was in the round pen, bucking them out. And she had so many injuries, and had so many broken bones because the horse, they had like an 8-foot high round pen, small. And she'd just saddle the horse, get on it, and buck it out, right? So she was hurt a lot of times. And one day I was riding home from the stable, and an old man walked out with a cane and a book in his hand. And he said his porch gave him a view of the riding arena right behind him and the round pen. And he said he had seen me riding by every day, rain, snow, or shine. And he wanted me to have this book. And it was a book written by an American cavalry officer on how to start young horses without bucking. And so I took that home, and my parents were boarding a 16-hen 2-year-old thoroughbred that belongs to one of our friends. And they said that I could start this horse under saddle. So I just took the book and I went through all the steps of ground driving.
How old are you at this point?
I was 11 or 12. And it was really easy to follow it. And she never bucked and was never afraid. And it was an easy process. And that's the basis. Now, I remember my grandfather in the stable, and we had adapted one end of the barn that had been a cow stable. We made big box stalls. And I remember him putting his hand on the horse's neck and saying to me, whenever you connect with a horse, connect with your heart, connect with kindness.
Okay.
And,
so this came from a family member.
right. Yeah.
What was his story? How did he come by this?
Well, this is really, I wish that I had been prepared. I should pull together some pictures. It'd be really fun to see it. My grandfather, Will Kaywood, was an American jockey and quite well known. We have
Mother's side or father's side?
Mother's side, Kaywood.
So horses were in the family.
Yes,
okay.
both sides.
Okay.
Both sides. I want to tell you that. So my grandfather, Will Kaywood, had been approached by an Austrian count through an agent to go to Moscow in Russia from this is from the U.S., and ride the horses of this Austrian who sent the horses from Vienna to Moscow. And so my grandfather rode them in 1905. He went there and rode them. And he liked it so much in Russia, he decided to stay on and become a trainer. And so in 1905, he won the prestigious Tsar Nicholas II. It was a jeweled cane for the most winners of the season, and with 87 winners. And he said he attributed, because he came to actually, this is a whole kind of difficult story, because I never met him. It was my great uncle, his brother, I met, and they were in business in horses. And I have a painting that I've now given to my niece Mandy of a horse named Scintilla that they imported. And this horse was very successful, and the jockey did this painting. But my grandfather said that his success was because he never entered a horse in a race unless it told him it was feeling fit enough to win. And the second thing is, every horse was rubbed with these short little strokes over every inch of the body for 30 minutes by the grooms. And he learned that from a Russian gypsy named Orlov, because still today in Russia, it's the gypsies that handle all the horses on the racetrack. And I got to meet them when I was there as a citizen diplomat. So
did you notice, now we're jumping ahead, but did you notice when you did go and meet these grooms on the Russian racetrack, did you see a similarity between the way they were touching the horse and TTouch?
I didn't see them actually touching the horse. I was with the directors and stuff, introducing myself and the work that I was doing. So I didn't get them actually see them working on horses.
But there is a chance that there could be some sort of connection to what your great uncle learned out there, which then begs the question, and we can throw this one out to the ether, but it begs the question, do you think that if TTouch has partially its origins in what you witnessed from your great uncle, from what he learned in Russia, from these Russian gypsies who were probably also of Cossack and Central Asian ancestry, do you think that this way of touching horses could possibly go back to the origins of riding and training horses? Because we all know that it comes out of that area where Russia, Ukraine meet the sort of Black Sea, Caspian Sea, that step there, the origin of the modern thoroughbred, we know that comes from there. Do you think that something in TTouch could possibly go back 4,000 years to those first people learning how to domesticate those riding horses?
I have no question about it. I think it comes from the Mongols. I think it comes way before that, because of when we get to that part of the story, because what I brought in was the circular touch.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing new in the universe. I just pulled that out of the quantum field, I'm sure. And when you hear the story of how it came, you'll think the same thing.
Okay. So there you are. You're riding horses successfully in the Edmonton show. You're helping to prepare horses for clients. You've started this young horse, and you found this ground driving, by the way, for those who are horsey, but don't use that term. That means long reining and long lining. And it's still the sort of accepted way you'd start a young horse, particularly in Ireland today. But it seems to have gone from a lot of other traditions. But it definitely works for allowing the horse to understand what they're going to do under saddle before they put under saddle, which makes it safer for them and for the rider. Okay, but so you've started this horse now, and you've seen this way of touching a horse. Something is in you anyway, because you've been touching bears' ears since you were little. And now you are basically at age 12, 13 or so, a professional in the horse world, albeit in Edmonton. How do you end up drifting south?
Okay. So at the Edmonton Horse Show for my 15th birthday, there is one of the premier classes of the whole week would be a jumper class. You'd have to, you have to qualify to keep jumping through the whole week. So on the last day, a rider named Ray Edgington broke his arm, and he had one of the top horses named Bouncing Buster. And he was a a 14 two-hand quarter horse. And because I was known for catch riding, he asked me if I'd ride the horse. And I had about 10 minutes to get on and go over one little jump, and we won it. And there was a big article in the paper, which I have about that, still have. But anyway, Wentworth Tellington, who became my husband, was sitting next in the grandstands next to my mother. And you can imagine she went nuts when I, you know how moms are. She was early when I won. So Wentworth managed to talk her into bringing him to the exhibitor party. And at the exhibitor party, he, sallied up to me and said he'd like to buy that horse from me because the horse was for sale. And I said, it's not worth the money they're asking. I'm not interested. Thank you very much. Well, he managed to get to my mother somehow. And, oh God, Rupert, this is another whole long story. You love story. Should I tell you the story?
Please tell me the story.
So at the Calgary Horse Show, which had been the month before this show, I had just won the third leg of the Calgary Herald Newspaper Challenge Cup. I won it 3 years in a row. And so, I was with a friend, we were walking around in the afternoon, and I saw this cowboy. God, I'm sure all you women have been there, or many of you have, with a really big hat. And I was really interested in a big hat. So he invited me to go out that night. So here I am, a 15-year-old sneaking out of the hotel.
This is not Wentworth. This is somebody else.
But not Wentworth, but it leads to Wentworth.
This is pre-Wentworth.
Well, you'll see how it brought me to Wentworth.
Got it.
So anyway, he wrote me a letter and asked me to marry him, for God's sake. I was 15. And my mother read the letter, I'm happy to say. And she didn't say anything to me. Oh, she did say something to me. Anyway, she invited him there, and this is not a guy I was interested in. Come on, I was 15. But so my mother thought she would get me out of town for the summer and get me away from this guy. And so invited me to work the horses. He was an engineer, and he was going out for the summer with a magnetometer looking for oil anomalies that he sold to big oil companies.
Okay.
And so
this is the cowboy.
No, this is Wentworth, my husband.
Wentworth. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
So my mom, to get me away from she thought I would be interested in this cowboy, which I wasn't, but she got me out with Wentworth. So anyway, I wound up eventually 3 years later marrying Wentworth Tellington when I was 18. And it's thanks to him that we had this wonderful school because of all his amazing classical education and learning.
Okay. So tell us about Tellington. He's clearly a formative person. He's half of your name, and you go on to start this amazing thing with him. He's also interested in the Rosicrucians. He's interested in herbs and healing. He's clearly a very fine horseman. He's got clearly a cavalry connection. Tell us about this man. And what was he doing up there in Calgary?
He wasn't in Calgary. That was where I met the cowboy that made my mother want to get me out of town in Edmonton.
Okay. So
the cowboy we can now let go. He was just an instrument to get me out in the woods with Wentworth.
But hold on. I'm confused. I thought that you said that when you won the class and your mum went nuts, Wentworth was in the stands next to your mother.
Yes.
And wanted to buy the horse.
Correct.
Okay. But before that, there had been a cowboy. So your mum had invited this Tellington chap, or he was still unknown to your mum at that point. Sorry.
Totally unknown.
Yeah.
Totally unknown. It was one of those, accidents of the universe. No accident. There are no accidents.
Correct. And what was he doing up there? If he was California based at that point, was he?
He was an engineer.
Okay. Oil and gas.
Oil and gas in Edmonton, Alberta. Yeah.
Got it. Yes, that makes sense. Okay. So then, so you meet Wentworth. Wentworth wants to buy the horse, is showing no interest in you, but yet 3 years later, you marry the man.
Well, wait a minute. Of course, the horse was a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so he wound up actually buying another horse for me that was a grandson of a man of war and shipping it with a handler from the Maryland Bassing-Tipton sale. And I have pictures riding this beautiful stallion. He was a 6-year-old stallion that had not been that successful in racing. And we bought this horse and I did really well with him. So it's just all this part of, being able to get on horses and manage not to get in a fight with them. And one of the things I want to say to you, Rupert, that the reason, I don't get on a horse if I'm afraid.
Yeah.
What makes it possible for me to connect to them is taking them in hand, even for a few minutes, and getting them to walk through the labyrinth, because it gives them boundaries. And we make a connection there. And I described this today. It's not, hey, I'm going to take a hold of you, better listen to me. It's not at all. It's really this heart-to-heart connection, because people say to me, I work with many different exotic animals in zoos.
Right.
And how can you work with all these different species? Because I ask the person who knows them about them, and I connect with them at a cell-to-cell level. We're going to get that to the cell-to-cell in a little while, what they're to do with all of us. Because at this level of the cells, we're all the same. And
interesting. Okay. So, but at that point in your life, you're not aware of this in a conscious way, presumably. You're somehow feeling it.
But I absolutely, I made that connection with any horse. So before I get on them, I take them in hand and walk them through. You walk and stop and just put my hands on them. Like you said, you feel my hands on you. So what's my message is in my hands to you is feel your perfection. Because we are miracles, as I said before. And every cell in the body, this is, well, we'll come to that in a little bit, because I want to tell you how I got to this, where I am today, because it's really interesting it's following like a trail of breadcrumbs that I listened for and followed.
Okay, I'm listening. I'm actually just writing down and making a note here. I'm saying Linda's message through her hands. Feel your perfection. I love this.
Through my hands to the horse, to you, to any being that I put my hands on. And today, I only in the last 6 months finally understand really what that means at a whole other level. And I've been searching for this all these years. Like, Rupert, you've seen what I can do with a horse that's upset, afraid, because all that excitement, it's all about fear when they lose it like that.
Yeah.
And so what we've discovered with this 1 1/4 basic TTouch, which I'll tell you in a bit how I came to that, because the story is really interesting. The breadcrumb trail, as I see it. So I'm going to take it in its own order, actually. So I want to stay on this track where you are right now.
You are now married to this man, Tellington. And he is American. He is not Canadian. He's in oil and gas. He's up there. You then end up running a farm together down in California. Is he already there? Does he already own this farm? Do you start this together? What's the story?
Let me tell you how he got there. So in Edmonton, Wentworth had a lot of injuries from different accidents and a lot of bones that were aching. And so he decided that first of all, he went to Reno, Nevada to get a divorce, and then to sell a gold mine to Harold's Club. Not a gold mine, sorry, oil. One of the oil leases that he found. And then he decided he needed some warm weather to recuperate. So we went to Puerto Rico for 1.5 years. And for 1.5 years, I was without horses. It's the only 1.5 years. Yikes. And so then after 1.5 years, he decided that he wanted to give something back to the world for all that he had through his wonderful education at Andover. So he applied to a private prep school in Rolling Hills, California, Chadwick School. It was a residential private prep school. And I thought I would be going there and be going to university. But the second day that we were on the property, because it's a place where we had to live, Mrs. Metherall, the head of the school, called Mrs. Chadwick, called me in and sat me down and said that I was going to be the senior girls' dorm mother and that I would teach 8th grade social studies.
Okay.
This is what in those days a private school could do. So I got the book that I was going to be teaching, and I read through the book, and I started teaching social studies.
Okay.
And
how old are you at this point? 20?
Yeah, about 20.
Yeah.
And I loved it. It was really incredible because in a private school like that, I had 8 kids in my class. And, when we were studying different countries, I could take them on field trips into Los Angeles and go to different restaurants that represented the food from the country. And we were very creative.
So this is Southern California by Los Angeles.
That's right. But yes.
Where was Tellington from originally? Was he an East Coaster or a West Coaster?
New Hampshire.
Okay. So this was a departure for him as well to go to the West Coast.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so now you're a social studies teacher.
I'm a social studies teacher, and he's teaching math and English and creative writing. And I took his creative writing classes, which, I wish I had those pieces that I wrote then. It was really wonderful. And what I learned from him writing, Rupert, was so interesting. Whenever you're telling a story, hang the gun on the wall if you're going to shoot someone, let them know from the beginning in some way.
Right. Yeah. Leave a clue.
But I like the way he said that, hang the gun on the wall. And so anyway, I was really excited about creative writing and was doing a lot of stuff at that time. And then in one of Wentworth's classes was a young man named Roland Klager, who is my current husband.
Of course he is. Okay.
And
how do we
we've
get
been
that?
married 24 years. Isn't that wild?
It is. So sorry. So your current husband was your pupil or was a co-teacher or was someone else?
No, he's 3 years younger than I am. He was in the senior class and he had a football injury and so he couldn't play anymore. And so he wanted to learn to ride. And one of his friends' father had a big ranch. And so they sent a horse up to there was a stable at the private prep school. I had horses there and was giving lessons and buying horses and selling them and training.
So you're back into riding at this school. They have horses there.
Right. That was
okay. And you are teaching a riding or horsemanship class, or it's purely recreational at this point? Someone else is running that program.
No, there was no program for the school itself. It was just private students.
Okay, could bring their horses.
Could bring their horse in.
Got it.
Yeah. And so I taught Roland to ride. And those of you, he is just an incredible human being. I'm so blessed. And the fact that when we left the school and Roland got married to his first wife, we sent him a wedding present, which his first wife is said to still have.
Okay. What was the present? Do you know? Do you remember?
It was a double-headed axe because they were pioneering in northern British Columbia and they had to chop wood, believe it or not, and yeah.
That's funny. So you give a newly married couple a double-headed axe so they can each take a swing.
The double-headed, I don't know why.
Hilarious. Okay, so presumably you getting married to Roland happens sometime later. So how long do you remain married to Tellington? And given that you create this rather cutting edge riding academy, what becomes of all that?
So it was 16 years I was married. And it's kind of an interesting story. It's too long to tell here. It's quite fascinating, actually.
Okay.
But we split on amenable terms. We never had a lawyer. I bought him out and kept the school and the name and all the equipment and all the horses. And I continued to run it I had really good riding teachers who had
Okay.
gone to our school and were really excellent. And I also had Wentworth's son, Jay, was there helping me. And interestingly enough, Roland and his family were there helping Wentworth develop a program. So after I ran the school, maybe, I don't know, a few months, you see, I also had in training, like many horses from Countess Margaret Bethany. That's her story in this book. It's her story. Amazing story.
And who was she?
She was a Hungarian countess whose grandfather was Marcus Daly, and he owned this huge Bitterroot ranch in Montana.
Okay.
Which she inherited. And she was a wonderful horsewoman, and she had seen our articles because we had articles in Western Horseman called Let's Go. We had them monthly columns. And so she would be reading our columns and then called us and asked if she could come to visit. And she brought a couple of her horses down and wanted me to work with them, which I did. And I wound up having usually 10 of her horses. And I took them not in training for 2 months, but for 2 years, and we campaigned them. So she was
In what discipline were they in all disciplines?
with me. They were in endurance riding, jumping, and 3-day eventing.
Okay.
Yep. So, and you'll see that in some of my books. And it's so interesting, when I had that astrological reading saying that my work would spread around the world, behind me on this bookshelf, I have my books in 22 books in 16 languages. So from that point, it really has spread thanks to my publishers.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
It is.
So, okay, you're running this writing school, your creative writing workshops have clearly paid off because you're now publishing articles about what you're doing in Western Horseman magazine and so on. People are taking notice of this to the point that they want to come check out your school, bring their horses to you. You're training horses for aristocrats. You're training these people who are going to go on to be very well known in the horse business. Why not just stay with that for the rest of your life? Why go on into the healing arts and
that's
change careers like you did?
Really good question. So, interesting story, because I know you love the nitty gritty, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what happened with our school at Badger is we had wonderful connections with different organizations. And one of them was Prescott College in Prescott, Arizona. And I was asked to go and I can't remember how this happened. I must have met the director of Outward Bound. And so I was asked to go and give a workshop to students about endurance riding and what it takes to, go into another discipline. And so after that class, we invited the head of the Outward Bound, Roy Smith, and 8 of his students to come for a weekend to us and learn to ride in a weekend, jumping and riding in a weekend, these athletes. And that's what we could do in our school, Rupert, because it was a logical way of specifically riding in balance. So it was easy for these athletes to do.
And I presume you were putting them on schoolmaster horses that were not going to kill them. Yeah.
We have really great horses. That's a whole other thing in this book. We just translated this to German. And one of the reasons that our horses were so good is the fact that I never allowed a person to ride a horse unless they liked the horse. And if they didn't like that horse, they would not get on them, because horses know when you don't like them and they want to work for you if you do like them.
Mm.
It makes a huge, huge difference.
Okay, so you've got this incredible program going, and you've got these athletes coming from Prescott College.
Right. And now I'm trying to forget. Oh, yeah. So, oh my God. Okay. So we have this group of students there. We're sitting at the dining room table, and we have people learn in the class. They learn to be a hostess and help people. And so we were serving dessert, and the dessert that was brought out to my table, I have many, like 4 or 5 different tables of food. Our table were peaches for dessert. And Winter said, I ordered pears. And he got up and stomped into the kitchen. And I thought, oh. And he came back out and he said, well, she may quit. And I said quietly, I wouldn't blame her. And you have to understand, Rupert, I had never in my all 16 years with him, never dared to open my mouth to oppose him because he was very violent.
Okay, so there was a light side and a dark side to this man.
There was a dark side due to, I think, alcohol. Yes.
Mm.
And so I don't know, it was meant to be that I said that. And he said to me, step outside. And I said, okay. So I walked out, and thank God there was a solid door so people couldn't see what happened. So he stood in front of me, and I'm telling this because some of you may have had experiences that were really terrible and you've lived through them, which I did. So he said, say that again. And I said, I wouldn't blame her. She quit. And he punched me and knocked me down.
How much bigger than you was he?
Oh, he was only 5'8". But he was on the boxing team at, in his prep school.
Yeah, he must have known the damage he could do. What possessed him, do you think? I mean, what do you think? Do you think anything went through his mind, thinking,
"Oh,
what if I accidentally kill her? I'm a boxer, I'm a trained boxer."
No, he wouldn't think that. This is something that happens, I think, to people. Anyway,
he lost his rational mind.
But what I want you to tell you about it that's so interesting is that do you remember those years there used to be a little glass and there was something called the dodo bird? Yeah. And the dodo bird, if you tipped it down, tipped right back up. What came in my mind, I just jumped up and stood in front of him like a dodo bird. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anything. And he said, say that again. And I did. And he punched me again. And when I stood up and just looked at him, I didn't say anything, or I just stood and looked at him. And he said, I think we better go. I think we better talk. And I said, yes, I think we better. So we went for a walk, and I told him some of the ridiculous things that he had done, which it's way too long a story for that, about, again, punching out our lawyer. And, he couldn't think. And that's the dark side of him. Mm. The bright side is I wouldn't be sitting here with you if I hadn't been with him those years.
Right.
And one of the biggest things I learned, Rupert, that has made a huge difference to my life is if I don't know something, I say, oh, interesting, I don't know that. Instead of trying to fake that you know something if a student asks you a question. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is to share information, because in the horse world, all the trainers had their secrets. Right. And that's what our syndicated column was about, sharing secrets of how we manage to get along with horses in this way with safety, without getting hurt, with appreciation, with a smile. And for that, I honor this man. So the punch out.
Okay. It light his dark to his light.
Yeah. I mean.
But then he punches you out like this. You can't come back from that. At that point, do you leave him?
No. That wasn't it. That wasn't. Okay. We went for a walk, and then he said, I think you need time to think. And so he said, I'm going to go. We had an apartment in San Francisco that we would sometimes go to on weekends. And he said, I think I'm going to go to the apartment and let you think about this. So he did. And I was so relieved when he walked out the door. And the big thing that I can be here and sit and talk to you like this is that I completely forgive him. And I can understand how such an intelligent person as Rupert Tellington, he was running a school for mostly women. We had a few men, but not many. And certainly no one of his intellectual level to talk with. What a terrible thing. So after 3:00 each day, he would never sign anything. He would never agree to anything after 3:00 because that's when, he'd start drinking these glasses of whiskey. So big gift here for me is forgiveness of myself, whatever role I played, and for what that I take responsibility for that.
So then you go off to the apartment in San Francisco. You have a think.
No, he goes off.
He goes off. You're on the ranch.
Goes
You're
off.
relieved he's gone out of the door.
Right. Very relieved.
Does he come back at the end of the weekend saying, perhaps we should get divorced? Do you say that? Or
No. What happened was every morning I would have a 30 to 50-minute talk with Countess Bethany about the different horses and how they were doing. And she knew this going on with Wen. She knew how he was. And so she said, Linda, why don't you get a divorce? It never crossed my mind, Rupert.
Okay.
Never, ever crossed my mind. You just didn't do that in those days. And so I said, oh. And so I remember calling my mother in horror, thinking, what is she going to say? And when I told her, she said, oh dear, thank God, finally. Because she had never said anything ever about, she never talked about people. She wasn't a gossip. And so that was how that, so I told him that, and they said he knew at some point, he being 20 years old, that would happen. And, so we just worked it out.
Okay.
And
So he didn't then become violent again or anything like that?
Not at all. No, because he wasn't drinking.
Okay.
But
you must have still been around him when he was drinking a bit after that. So what prevented him from?
He didn't come back. We made it from a distance.
Okay.
Yeah. And then what happened, how I then got it, then Countess Bethany said, Linda, it's too much work for you. Why don't you just close the school, sell your school horses, and find a place that you really like near San Francisco, because I was a member of the Los Altos Hunt Club, and we were there, and then it's a much better place to promote my horses from there. So we found a beautiful place, and that's what I did. I moved over, and I had a huge fancy tipped in a very fancy sale, and sold all our school horses to a really good school that one of our students actually went on and knew the horses and was the teacher there.
Okay.
So, and it's in the book, some of how our students went on to be successful.
So then now you're running a new place. You're a solo act.
Yes.
You're still a long way from TTouch.
Well, no, but hold on. I forgot. There's another thing.
Okay.
I had a relationship with a student, and Margaret was much younger, 11 years younger, and he played polo, and Margaret said, why don't you marry him? He can be your consort. You can't be in the horse business in 1970 without a husband. You can't be, it wasn't allowed in the Hunt Club or any of those clubs. So I married him, and that's a whole other story that lasted 2.5 years, and we had a happy disconnect at that point. And he went off with ex-girlfriend who was working for me at the time, and I was so happy, you cannot believe it. But I couldn't tell her that, of course. Thank you very much. This is a nice shift.
Okay.
Then, so I had, and how that happened, I had the school. It was really a beautiful school over in Los Altos Hills. We had rented a house next to it that had 6 bedrooms and a pool.
Los Altos Hills, that is now Silicon Valley. Basically.
No, Silicon Valley. Well, yeah, I guess that's part of it. Perhaps that's part of it.
Sort of what is now. Yeah. Okay. But different back then. Okay. So you've got this wonderful place.
And we did a lot of showing with our horses, and we had students from all over again, but I only took students for 6 months at that point.
Okay.
And then I got the feeling, wait a minute, Rupert, I was so disillusioned of what was going on in the horse world, because it was no better than before. There was no more recognition of the horse's heart, of their feelings. It was just the same old dominant thing that was going on. And so I decided that I had to go around the world and find out what I was supposed to do.
Okay.
And so I was invited. I started in Germany to visit Ursula Bruns, who is responsible for my first book. She's the one who sat me down and said, Linda, you have to make a method of this work. And it's thanks to her I have my first of these 22 books now. So anyway, I went to visit her and she said, you have to give a presentation for Equitana. And I was planning to continue around the world to go spend some time with a student in Africa who was filming gorillas. But anyway, I didn't get there. I stayed in Germany, and then I developed this whole system, and thanks to Ursula Bruns with her camera and sitting me down it was old standard, wasn't a typewriter, it was, I forget what you call it, in between the typewriter and the computer. And
so you had been using this way of empathetic touch with horses through this whole successful career in California.
Yeah.
And now there you are, you've come to Germany thinking, I'm going to be a student again. I need to find out more. But now someone's looking at you going, oh, no, you're the one who's got to be the teacher, or is that how it plays out?
How it played out, first of all, I wanted to learn because I've been teaching so much in my life. And so when I got there and Ursula Bruns said, you have to make this presentation for Equitana. And it was that year there were 136,000 people who visited Equitana over those 9 days. And so I took my partner at the time, Roger Russell, and two other young men and 4 horses, and we trained them to do a quadrille for jumping with no bridles. And it was sensation of Equitana. It was in all the magazines. And what the magazines wrote is, oh my gosh, so many people are going to be killed. This is such a terrible idea. And now this last time, Rupert, you've seen in every discipline at Equitana, across the board, English, Western, dressage, everybody's riding with nothing on their horse's head.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because it's the trust. So I want to get out of this long story and take you to the story of how TTouch developed.
Okay.
So I'm in Germany after Equitana. I'm asked to teach a riding class because they wanted to know how I did this stuff, right? So we set up a class, and the advertisement, you had to either be an adult rider with fear from accidents, but an experienced rider, or you had to have a horse who's fearful. And so my organizer said, you don't need a translator. Every German speaks English. Not true, as you may have found out.
Indeed.
So I went in there and I got there and not one person spoke one word of English. So I, growing up in Canada, had 4 years of French and Latin. And so I knew how to conjugate. So I just wrote down 10 words I needed for teaching. And I thought, this is great. This is really fun. So I started using those words and we had an amazing time on that weekend. And so the Ursula Bruns, who had organized that and had already sold books with 750,000 readers, everybody knew her. She was an amazing human being. And she's the one who took me under her wing and said, you have to make a method when she saw what I was doing. And so my partner who was with me, traveling with me, Roger Russell, I was asked to form this riding school that would be set up by these, really organized Germans, and I would be the teacher. And Roger wanted to have something to teach. And we had been doing the Feldenkrais work one lesson at Esalen Institute the year before. And it had made such a difference to the movement, my movement as a rider, because in the classical way of getting into riding, you ride in one position depending on your discipline, right? Mm-hmm. So this gave me the movement in my pelvis thanks to this Feldenkrais awareness for movement like I had never had. And it was incredible. So Roger decided he wanted to bring that and implement it in the riding that we were doing. So he signed up for a class in San Francisco, and I took one look at the brochure because it was Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais from Israel teaching at the Humanistic Psychology Institute in San Francisco. And it was to be a 3-year course, which turned out to be actually 4 years because he felt we weren't ready. So I took one look at it and I said, I know I have to do this for my students. Never crossed my mind, Rupert, that it would make such a difference for me or for the work. And so it was a 12-week course, 4 days a week from 10 till 4. And then all year you did the studying and moving and practicing. And so the second day in the class, we're lying on the floor and he's making a statement. Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais made the statement that it's possible for a human to learn in one experience using these gentle, non-habitual movements that activate new neural pathways to the brain that give us more potential for learning. And I'm lying on the floor doing these movements he's leading us through, and I felt my ears prick up like a horse. And I thought, wait a minute, if this is true for a human, it's got to be true for a horse. So after class that day, I called a man I had just met who had brought a group of Arabian broodmares down from Montana. And I had been interested in buying one of them. And so I called him and I said, do you have any of the horses that have any habit that you'd like to see changed? And he said, well, I have this one horse that every day to catch her to bring her into the stable for her food, for the night, I had to chase her. It's not logical. So he chased her up and brought her to me. I came out after class and I did about 30 minutes of what I call exploring. And we had already, I want to show you this, 2 books here. He had already written what?
This is Feldenkrais.
This is just a booklet.
That you had written, that you guys had put out.
Yes, 15 years before, we wrote this booklet called Physical Therapy for the Athletic Horse, using its gypsy movements to help our horses recover after hard athletic endeavor. But it never crossed my mind that you could change the habit of a horse or change their behavior. And so I started working on this horse as we had done, moving the legs and moving different parts of the body in ways that horses would not move themselves. And
novel movement.
But
yes,
with a new thought. And the new thought was, wait a minute, what are the neural pathways that will be activated because I'm moving this with awareness in a way that this horse could not do it herself? And so I moved the legs with that in mind. What are the neural connections that are happening? Will this horse be able to learn new behaviors? So I was simply what I call exploring, Rupert. And so I did this thing and people watched me and they thought I'd hypnotized the horse. She was so quiet. This is a horse that had never been ridden. So I moved her head in different ways and took her ears and her legs and her tail. And then I went home. I didn't think anymore and he turned her loose. And he called me the next day and he said, you won't believe this. When I went to catch her to put her back in the stable, she came to the gate. And when I put her in the stall, instead of diving for the food, she stood there next to me like, do something. And I thought, holy mackerel, okay. Now, how did I get to where I am here today? The next level of this is this book. So at the end of the first summer in San Francisco at the Humanistic Psychology Institute, Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais recommended this book. It's called Man on His Nature by Sir Charles Sherrington. Sherrington was a Nobel Prize winner who won the Nobel Prize for talking about photons, the light in the cells. And when I read that book, I was sitting in Mövenpick restaurant in Stuttgart, Germany in a February, cold, rainy day, reading this book. And Dr. Charles Sherrington made the statement that every cell in the body knows its function in the body. And he told the story in such fascinating description of how if we cut ourselves, talking about how the body knows which fluids to send to that for healing. And I suddenly realized, wait a minute, if every cell in the body knows its function in this body, then all I have to do, if I am working on a horse or a person who has a problem, all I have to do is say, cells, remind this body, remind these cells of their potential for ideal function. And it's just a thought that I had. And so I would have that thought. And what I found is, wow, this is way before the circle. I could really make a difference in how a horse felt and how they behaved by just having this sense of giving new information in the body by these gentle movements. And the next level, so I was very successful with this, and we found that we could really change behavior. And one of the stories you might appreciate, and you got to jump in and stop me, because once I get on a roll with this, it takes me back to those days. So we're looking for other horses to try this theory on, right? So another day I go out to a polo barn, belonged to a polo player I knew, and he had also school horses, and he had one horse, another older mare that he played polo on, but they couldn't use her in the jumping program for students because she would not step over a line in the sand. So of course she wouldn't jump a pole or step over a pole. So I'm kind of scratching my head and thinking, interesting. So we're standing out in the arena, and there are a bunch of poles lying around because it was a jumping arena. And I'm at her tail, and Roger, my partner at the time, is today my good friend always, he was at her head, and I was doing something with her tail, and suddenly this horse was standing there with her head up. She just dropped her head and walked forward over a pole. I thought, holy mackerel, that's interesting. So we drew some lines in the sand, first of all, just with our foot. And I would work her tail, and he could lower her head, and she'd step over it. And then we got her working over a pole. And Rupert, my God, when I think about the relationship of the tail and the cranial sacral fluid that we understand today, and the ears with all of that, it's fascinating. Okay, so another discovery. So we started working with continuing to work on different parts of the body, and was very successful. My whole next book that's still in print, the introduction to the work, was 20 horses for 4 weeks that we took them. Horses with big problems like runaways or really dangerous, spooky horses. And so the next miracle that happened in my life, I was giving a workshop at the Delaware Equine Veterinary Clinic. And Matthew McKay Smith, did you ever meet Matthew?
I did. I knew the McKay Smiths because I worked in Middleburg, Virginia for my first ever horse training job in America when I was very, very young, 500 years ago. And I knew them, and I knew they were the top people for producing endurance horses at that time, as well as all sorts of other disciplines. Yeah. And Dr. McKay Smith was the go-to guru, absolutely, as a vet too.
Oh, well, he and his wife were really good friends, and I knew him from the time he was almost out of vet school. And he was the veterinary editor for Equine magazine for years.
I remember that, yes.
Yep. And he loved what I did, and his mother had a bunch of, I can't remember the breed right now, one of the Connemara ponies I think she bred. And I remember him wanting to tube one of them, and he wanted me to work with this horse to try it because the horse was really wild and basically unhandled, and he hadn't been able to tube her. So what I did was do some of the work we do, and then I took the nostrils and I just moved the nostrils in all different directions, and around the mouth. That's how all of that really was influenced. And then he could put a tube up her nose, just like that.
And by the way, again, for those listeners who don't know what you would put a tube up a horse's nose, you do it to save a horse's life. When a horse is colicking and the colon is impacted, the horse can die very quickly. And one way you can help with this is to put oil through the digestive canal. But you don't do it through the mouth. You do it through the nose, and it's called intubating. And if you can't intubate a horse in crisis, you may very well lose the horse. So it's quite crucial. And some horses accept it, no problem. They just sort of stand there. Other horses clearly not. So this is really interesting because I've seen one of my first exposures to your work, Linda, was, you remember when you were in Texas with us and we had our 3 stallions and you were showing us how to put our fingers inside the mouths and massage the gums and so on and so on. So anyone had said, oh, stick your finger in the stallion's mouth. I'm like, well, if Linda's telling me to do it, it must be good. So we did. And we found indeed our horses all became little puppies. So that's very interesting that I guess necessity is always the mother of invention, right? How else would one discover something like this, but in some sort of crisis where you've got to draw upon what the resources of what you've learned and see what works. That's interesting.
Well, actually, the way I came about it is a longer trip. And I'm sorry to go on so long, but it's fascinating.
No, it's fascinating. As long as you want.
So that with Dr. McKay Smith and the nostrils, that came as a result of a lecture that I had in my advanced training of the Feldenkrais work. We had a neurologist, an Israeli neurologist, talking to us about watching the mouth movements of a newborn infant, a human, and that if they were abnormal, there was some dysfunction neurologically. And so like 2 weeks after I was in San Francisco having that lecture, I was back in Germany working with a horse that someone had sent to me for a week. They wanted to know if I could work with her to make her friendlier because she didn't like to be caught and she wasn't particularly friendly. So, and she was really hard to bridle. So what I noticed that her mouth was really tight. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'll just play around. This thing I call exploring. This is before the circles. I play around with her mouth and her chin. And now today we do circles on it. But that's what we did then. And I found out, and I put my fingers up here, up on the gums, right? And I found out that in a very short time, she would relax. And then I was able to open the mouth and get her to open her teeth and bridle her. And her attitude really changed. And then I started talking about that and teaching it. And then I found another book that's here on my shelf, and it's called Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. And in the second, it's about humans. And in the second chapter, he talks about the fact that around the mouth and the nose, our taste and the smell affect our brain in a way that overcomes fear. That it affects the emotional centers of our brain.
Makes perfect sense. Since we were infants, right? Yes.
Yeah. All this fucking stuff, that we do to
self-soothe. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's how I got there. And with the nostrils, it was just, I don't know how I went, man. I can't remember the first time I did the nostrils, but maybe after reading that chapter that it wasn't just the mouth, it was the nostrils also. So as a result of that, Rupert, that Matthew McKay Smith was fascinated, but he always say it was me. It wasn't the method because he hadn't seen my students be able to do the same thing. And so did you ever meet Dr. Daniel Marks?
No, I did not.
Well, he was the friend of Matthew McKay Smith, and he was the vet for the American jumping team.
Okay.
And he had also seen me work because I had gone with him to work on a horse at the King Ranch. And so they invited me to do a workshop at their center. And they had a bunch of the 3-day eventers and different people come in, and I worked with their horses, showing them how they could improve performance with the Tellington work. And so one of the horses belonged to one of the other vets, and they didn't know what was wrong with her. Because in those days, all you did was measure from X-ray from the knees and the hocks down. For those of you not in the horse world, today, veterinarians look at every aspect of the horse with the back, the hips, the neck. None of that with the jaw are X-rayed, and they have ultrasound. They have everything we humans have. It was not available then. So they wanted me to put my hands on this horse and figure out why was she so aggressive. Like she'd pin her ears and snap her teeth and threaten to kick when you just approached her with a grooming thing or with a saddle. And so I just went up to her quietly like this and just put my hands on her rib area. And I didn't recognize what I was doing in those days. Today, what I absolutely know, Rupert, is I'm just giving her this message, feel yourself. And I see the horse not as aggressive or not as a problem, but just feel yourself, feel. And today, all I have to do is add to that, you're a miracle. I mean, we are miracles. Okay. And the horse got really quiet. She didn't pin her ears. She didn't move aside. And the wife of her owner said, Linda, what are you doing? Why is my horse not aggressive? Why is she not trying to, bite you or kick you? And I said intuitively, and now we get back to this word, intuition. You must learn to trust your intuition. Intuitively, I said, don't worry what I'm doing. Just walk up, put your hands on the shoulder, and move the skin in a circle. I didn't say a circle and a quarter in those days. That came way later. Move the skin in a circle. And when I said that, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I don't know what that's about. So I didn't tell her I didn't know what I was talking about. So she went up and she just gently pushed the skin, not with it, just lightly push skin in a circle. And the horse let her do this, like all over her ribcage, didn't move to the side, didn't pin her ears, didn't threaten to bite. And she said she couldn't believe it. And when I saw that, I couldn't believe it either. And I thought, wait a minute, it takes years to learn this beautiful Feldenkrais method. Anybody can move the skin in a circle. And that's when I started following the circles. And that's what we do today. And for years now, for humans and horses and dogs, we can relieve fear or pain, reduce pain, just with this, what we now know is a 1 1/4 circle. And it's taken years to come to that. This is a long story, as you can see, with a lot of influence from a lot of people.
So when I first was exposed to your method, I remember wondering, why 1 1/4? So for those listeners who aren't familiar, and hopefully there's lots of you, because then you can all have the treat of learning TTouch, because it works for people too. It basically, the basic pattern, which gets communicated when you're a rookie, is there is this way of moving the skin gently in a pattern that is basically a 1 1/4. Not a lot of pressure, but not too little pressure. But it's a 1 1/4. And the quarter, correct me if I'm wrong, the quarter circle at the end that you end with seems usually to, if I'm not wrong, to be an upstroke. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I've been using it. Thank God, I just checked. I've been using it, but it works. It works on my horses. It works on my dogs. It works on my kids. It works on me. The moment Linda showed this to us, because we were also running a large facility with horses trained at a very high level, with lots of clients coming in from all over the world, and a lot of pressure on us to, have horses that would show up in a good mood to do what they needed to do. And so we were always obviously interested in anything we could learn to make it nicer for our horses, and we still are. So I remember when you first showed up, Linda, and you showed us this, and I remember thinking, yes, like all genius things, it's something simple. But one of these days, I'm going to get to ask you, when there's not a million of your students around and other people, and I haven't got my hands on a horse and I'm trying to figure out what to do. What's the quarter bit? Why the circle and the quarter?
This is where I wish we had, I could draw it here. You see, I first said, push the skin in a circle. Mm-hmm. And then I changed the push, because it's like move it in a circle. Sometimes it's feather light, so you can't push, right? So move it in a circle. And then I realized if you do it, all of you watching this, if you just imagine a circle here and catch the skin, and actually I'm going to have you imagine up there on the wall, there's a clock, the kind that we used to have in schools where you had numbers, not this digital things, but where you've got a round thing like I have above me and you have the numbers on it. So there's a reason for doing this, and you'll see it in a moment. So I imagine taking that clock and I put it here on my chest, which is considered to be your heart chakra, right here. And I put imaginary numbers on it. I put 6 toward the ground, and I put up here, toward my right shoulder, I put my 9. Just imagine it from the outside, 12 up towards the chin, and 3 towards the left shoulder. Now, there's a real purpose that I say that direction. And now I'm going to make a tiny circle so you can see how actually small it is. And it's not this big thing. If I put one hand over the other, I move from 6 with a big press. Try it. 6 up to your 9. And I do it lightly. Don't press hard. Just enough to catch the skin and move it. So it can be, I'm using the heel of my hand there. There. And I go 6, 9, 12, 3, 6, up to 9. And I stop. And I just release.
I just did it.
Try the, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's just get the listeners to do it. So if you're driving a car right now, a lot of you will be, you're going to need 2 hands. So if you're not on the freeway, pull over, because this is worth a shot. It does work. Okay, so we got to just give people a chance to pull over. They're looking in their rear mirrors, going around. Oh, can I park the car here? Put the car in park or slide it into gear, engine off or running park. Okay, now I think they're ready. Tell us now. We're all going to do it together, Linda.
Okay, so we take this imaginary clock and we place it there, as though we're looking at it from the outside.
So this is over our heart on more or less the left side of our chest.
Actually, let's go in the middle in the heart chakra.
So we're right in the middle of our chest.
Yep.
Okay. And 2 hands, 1 hand over there. Does it matter which hand is in contact with the body, left or
whatever you like?
Okay.
It is natural. And the reason you do both, I started calling this a TTouch heart hug when I was teaching this to orphans in Soweto, because it's like a hug, for those who are orphans, or it's like a hug to protect yourself. So one hand, you start at 6, however, just like make a little connection. Oh yeah, there's a 6, 9, up to 12. Deep breath around to 6 and up and stop at your 9 o'clock. Now you did that once in the clockwise direction. Let's try it and see how it is for you in the other direction. Let's start at your imaginary 6 and go up to the left, up to the 3, 12, 9, 6, and back up to the 3. Now, if you just start from 6 and go to 6. How does that feel? And then go to the other direction, do 6 to the right and just around to 6. Does it make you hold your breath?
I inhaled through my nose as my hands went up from 6 to 12, and I exhaled as my hands went down back to 6 again. However, I would posit that I knew to do that because I've been looking at you in the camera and I watched you do it. So I don't know if I might have held my breath. Hold on.
It's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because actually, if you take a deep breath, it's true that I just did that now. I just did a 6 to 6 and I took a deep breath and it took me all the way from 6 to 6 to make that inhale. So yes, I've been holding my breath now back at 6.
So the reason that I'm just telling you, because we normally, what I didn't say, like I breathe in through my nose, as you mentioned before, and out
through the mouth.
Yeah. And so there's a reason for all of this. Out through the nose activates the nitric oxide. So,
Uh,
yeah. So now, what I found is, wait a minute, it didn't feel finished at 6 to 6.
mm,
So then we start, what happens if I go a little beyond 6? That's how in the first days in my first books, it was just a little beyond 6. So it went to about 8 o'clock. And
okay.
then what changed that years later of doing this very successfully and publishing several books, a young man who's a savant came into one of our classes in Germany, a weekend class for self-help. And he said, that basic circle and a little more that you're doing, if you just go to circle and a quarter, that's that golden cut or golden spiral that's in all of nature. And
The fractal pattern. Yes.
and so the thing that was so interesting with that is that it's we've now discovered it's 5 degrees short of 1.25. That is in our DNA. It actually can affect our DNA. It is in all of nature. It's everywhere. It's
Right. It's a pattern of 3, 6, and 9, which is Tesla's key to the universe, right? That all
right.
numbers are everything in creation that's creative is 3,
Yeah.
3, 6, or 9 somehow. Interesting.
Oh, now this is so. I started already because it's so hard when we went to computers and writing so much. It's hard to go to 6 and a little beyond. So I started saying 6.25. And I'd been writing that for some time. Oh yeah, it's just natural to stop at that quarter. Now what it does, I sort of got off subject a minute. Try it a few times. If you have these looping thoughts and you can't focus, just do a few of these 1.25 circles.
So while people have still got their cars stopped, and
Yes.
if you drove off again, now you've got to pull over again. Sorry. Okay, so pull over again, and let's do can you guide us through
Yes.
3 of these, perhaps? Would you think that's good?
Yes.
Okay.
6 minutes in through the nostril.
So hold on. So 2 hands in the center of the heart, 1
Yeah.
hand in connection through one's t-shirt to one's skin. Okay.
Yes.
In through the nostrils.
And 1 in and around the face of the pocket, out through your pursed lips, and back up to the quarter and stop. Take another neck, just release your hands a little bit. Take another deep breath and do this in the direction that you prefer. And think of now, as you go the last time around, think of something for which you're very grateful. Something that makes you feel really good. And stop. And what that does from the studies that we've been doing for years, you can be having these looping thoughts that you can't stop, or you're agitated. Something's really bugging you and you can't slow down. Do this 1.25. Smile, because that activates your serotonin.
Yeah.
Just the stretching of your lips. That's your feel-good hormone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And light contact has been shown in a 2,000-person study by the American Massage Association. It's been the light contact, not deep pressure, activates the most trust hormone,
Oxytocin. Yeah.
Oxytocin, exactly. And so just the light move, and it doesn't have to be on your heart. The reason we started calling it a heart hug was when I taught it to these orphans who are alone, living alone, often getting only a lunch meal. And we were there during the serving of the lunch meal to teach them this. So when they're afraid, you can do this stuff. Or how many of you get these things where you have the same few words go over and over around through your head and you can't stop it, right? That will stop it. Now, why is it important, Rupert? I want to give you this. What the heck? Why is that useful to us? Because I imagine the face of this clock here. Anytime I imagine anything, that activates my right brain. And when I put the numbers on, or I have a method, that's why I say toward the shoulder, toward the chin. That's a method that we do. And when we have those methods, that activates our logical part of the brain. And we can't be here together without that logic.
The left side of the brain.
Right. On the
Yeah.
left side of the brain.
So
Now,
what you're talking then about is hemispheric coherence, getting
exactly.
both sides of the brain to cohere
Exactly.
instead of
Yeah.
one taking over from the other.
Yeah.
Got it.
And I mean, the logic is so important, but the right brain is, this is what I believe makes us human, because it's responsible for our creativity, for our feeling. And during COVID, I mean, so this feeling deficit syndrome was recognized, that we don't feel it. So many people don't feel anymore. And so when you do this heart hug and give thanks, give gratitude for the fact that you can do it, or even that you can imagine it.
Mhm.
And it activates that whole, that it's the intuition, the compassion that we have for others, for ourselves, for the planet, for our animals. So,
Mm.
creativity, feeling.
Mm.
So that's why we do it. That's part of it. And if you're working with an animal, a dog or a horse, if you do this before you go to do some exercise you want to do with them, that puts you in heart coherence. It gives you the activity of the forebrain, so you can actually think and feel and heal. And instead of being under the control of the amygdala, the emotional part of our brain,
Mm.
is where we have our fear.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can't, for those listeners who are unfamiliar with that, the amygdala, named after an almond in Greek, because it's shaped like an almond, is the part of the brain that governs fight, flight, and freeze, and signals to the body to produce cortisol, which is the stress hormone, as well as adrenaline, so that you act, you don't think when there's a threat. But the problem is cortisol is a neurotoxin, and it cuts momentarily the cord between the back part of the brain and the forebrain, the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is what gives us logic, reason, but also emotional regulation. So figuring shit out and handling your shit, which are jolly useful survival tools, right? So what you've done, I think, Linda, there has given us a way when we're in our funk, when we're in our dysfunctional funk, not when we're in the George Clinton having fun type of funk,
Right.
the dysfunction, a way back to brain coherence through serotonin and oxytocin that is pretty much instantaneous. I can attest to this, whenever I've tried it on myself, I'd say that I can get from the dysfunk back to the we want the funk type funk in approximately 5 to 15 seconds. Sometimes it might take me 3 to 6 repetitions, or sometimes it might happen right away. But it's very interesting that your circle and a quarter, your circle and a bit, there's so many, as you say, the golden ratio, pi is like that. It's, something and a bit, all these irrational numbers that seem to sequence and have effects on our DNA and get repeated all through. We see it at every level in cosmology. We see it everywhere. And there you are stumbling into it from having been an 11-month-old girl in Yellowknife with her hand on a bear's ear instinctively, and seeing your great uncle who'd been out to Russia, putting his hands on the horses with kindness and explaining that, however briefly, and then having this horse gene anyway, of course, that was a gift. And then bringing that through from functional horsemanship to refined horsemanship to then a way of looking at the world and a way of looking at the horse that didn't just serve you in your professional career then with horses, but also helped you, for example, survive a very, very difficult situation like the one you described with Tellington, where you could not only survive it, but you could actually forgive him and love him afterwards, and then therefore not negate all of the gifts and benefits of that relationship, not think in extremes like that, which would have been understandable, but would not have been as helpful to you. And then you go on to run the school yourself, and then you end up in Germany, and people are watching you touch the horses like this, and then you discover Feldenkrais, and there's a method to it. But as you say, Feldenkrais is quite complex and takes quite a long time to learn. And then realizing that it can be brought down to something simpler and more direct through intuition. I love it. And here you are giving it to the rest of us. So you say it's 22 books now? In
20 books in 16 languages now.
22 books in 16 languages. That's not too shabby.
I just got my latest one in Korean, the dog book in Korean. Because we've had Korean people come to us in Hawaii to do our trainings before COVID.
I have to joke because a dog book in Korean could, of course, be a cookery book as well, but in North Korean, but I'm assuming it's not that. This brings me to where I'd like to go now. So for those of you who are just discovering Linda today, you should go out, and you have nothing to do with horses or dogs. Go anyway and look up TTouch on Google and start to practice some of the basic exercises on yourself, on your loved ones, because you're going to find, like the rest of us have done, that it helps an awful lot. And then from there, you might want to go onto her website, which I'll be giving to you at the end of this podcast. And so, to say you've been massively successful is an understatement, and also I feel distracts from the point of this conversation, which is, again, self-actualization. I would posit that when you were a girl riding to school in Alberta, or when you were running this school with Tellington, or when you were beginning to do your first writings and explorations, and I would very much doubt that you went into it going, I'm going to do this because this is going to make me rich and famous. I would posit that you did it because it was what was in front of you and inside you to do. And the success of it is purely down to its practicality, that when people try it, they go, oh, this works. I remember hearing a quote from Klaus Balkenhol, who, again, if those people who are not horse people, he was an Olympic dressage rider from Germany when Germany really began to dominate in the sport in the late 70s and 80s. And he, I know, brought you in to his Olympic horses at a time when nobody was doing anything like that. And what do people say? Well, it's this new age shit, and I remember him saying, well, she's a white witch. But I think you would say, no, I'm not a white witch. What I've stumbled into is purely something that works on a cellular level, which anybody can do. If it relied upon Linda being a white witch, well, then it would die with Linda, and it also wouldn't be transferable from Linda. But clearly it is. And here you are now. Where do you want to go? What's next? What's on the agenda?
Well, thanks to COVID, I am so blessed to finally have what I believe is the answer to how is it with this simple 1 1/4 circle. Anywhere we have a pain, we can reduce that pain in a matter of minutes. Or if we are fearful, we can overcome our fear just with these touches around the outside of the mouth for humans. Don't have to go inside, just around. I mean, think about this, without this mouth, unless we're in a hospital, we can't survive.
Yeah.
So you can actually reduce your fear and look, this is guys with beards are so lucky because this helps you think.
Yeah, it does. We all do this when we think. So I'm stroking my beard. And what I do when I want to self-soothe is I massage my jaw. I've realized. I have to scratch my butt, but I can't do that when I'm in a chair.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's all logic. It's the science and spirituality. That's what gets me. And finally, thanks to COVID, I've been doing a lot of teaching online for self-help. You can join me for every Tuesday for 2 hours. We have TTouch for self-care. And learning how, when you've got a pain here, like, oh, my husband had a real pain in his neck, like an 8 level out of 10 pain yesterday. And I just started having him guide me. Not that I'm telling him, oh yeah, I'm going to fix this. No. Where exactly does it hurt? And what pressure can I use? Is it very light that you like, a little bit more? and have him guide me. And in 15 minutes, a pain that was on 8 level was down to a 2, and then it was gone after he got up. And that's what you can do to yourself. That's so cool because we have these ways of working with it. And thanks to COVID, Rupert, I now know why this 1.25 works.
So tell us.
I'm going to tell you. And thanks to the influence of this book and all these books behind me.
The Code of Authentic Living Cellular Wisdom by?
Right. And it's written by Joan C. King. And what's interesting, she was for 20 years, she was a cell biologist at Tufts University of Medicine. And she heard a legend that caused her to quit being a professor and take it into authentic living. And this book is about exactly how the cells work. And what's so interesting, I had the great honor and pleasure of co-teaching a workshop with Dr. Bruce Lipton in Vienna about 6 years ago. I brought TTouch and he brought his magic.
Who is Dr. Bruce Lipton, for those who don't know?
Oh, he is one of our visionaries in bringing science to the rest of us. And he taught cell biology at Stanford University for years. And then he found in his first book, The Biology of Belief, he wrote that what was being taught was so old and so out of date that he had to leave that and become a vision. What we now know him as a visionary, doing these wonderful. You can go online and find him. Do yourself a favor and look up Dr. Lipton. And so he's interested in animals too. So he knew what I did with dogs and horses, and he loves dogs. And so he showed me on his computer, he showed me that every cell in the body has a huge number of known functions. Like the number I remember is 100,000. I've got to check again to make sure this is correct. But in this book, she describes all of the amazing functions that are known. But what's not known is what's behind all these functions. And on the back of this book is the answer to that. And it's a Hindu legend. And I'm just going to tell you for time's sake. So the legend goes that at one time on this planet, every human had the power of a god. They could do anything. And then humankind began to abuse that power. And the head Brahmin, Hindu Brahmin, said, we have to stop this. We cannot allow the world to be damaged in this way. And so he said, we're going to take away this power from humankind. And so they had this big powwow, and they got together and they said, okay, who has an idea? How can we hide this power that everyone has? And one said, I know, we'll take it to the highest mountain and we'll climb up there and we'll leave it. Nobody will find it. No, head Brahman said, of course, humankind is very intelligent. They'll find it. Another one said, we'll go to the deepest ocean, part of the ocean, we'll drop it there. No, they'll find it. Then another said, I know, we'll go to the deepest cave known on the planet and dig deeper and hide it there. No, they'll find it. He sat for a long time quietly just listening. And then he said, I know where we'll hide it. Inside. They'll never find it. And so the legend goes that since that time, humankind has been running up the mountains, digging in the dirt, diving in the ocean, looking for this power that's always right here. And why this is so, when I read that, I thought, my Christian friends are not going to be interested in a human, in a Brahmin legend. And so I called a friend of mine who knows the Bible really well and is a minister. And I said, where does it say that in the Bible? And he said, in the New King James Version, Luke 17, lines 20 and 21, the kingdom of God is within you and all around you. And it depends which version you read, exactly how that's said. But what I've since found, Rupert, it's in every religion. It's everywhere. It's just understanding that God was within. But in some places of the Bible, we don't want to be given that power because we are we're living manifestations of the divine universal intelligence. And so I realized with this 1.25 circle that's in all of nature, it's like turning a key to enter into this amazing body that we have, where every cell knows its function in the body. And when we have fear or dysfunction, the communication between the cells is inhibited, which is so beautifully discussed in Dr. Bruce Lipton's book, Spontaneous Evolution. So this communication between the cells, and that's what started me on this whole thing. You're going to develop a form of communication that goes around the world. And this is the communication between us here, between us and ourselves. Between ourselves, that's all communication. And when we realize, wait a minute, we can just open ourselves to this phenomenal information that is in the quantum field. And if you don't know that, find one of the books by by Greg Braden. In his book, The Divine Matrix or The Field, you will get a whole other understanding of who you are and what your life is, what you're here about when you read his books. It's so
I've listened to some of his podcasts that he's quite extraordinary.
amazing.
Yeah.
And those two, Bruce Lipton and Greg Braden, do a lot of things together, which are life-changing. I'd love to meet you and go there with you and Ileana one day.
Let's do it.
It would be really fun. So you see where I am. I'm totally inspired about this. We're all miracles, and that's how I see our animals and ourselves. And when we have something wrong with us, instead of seeing what's wrong, wait a minute, we can visualize the light in ourselves, and we can actually either do it with our mind, as you get from, so many of these we've got so many visionaries out there talking about how you can affect yourself just from what you think.
Yeah. Yeah. Where does COVID come into this for you?
COVID was a life game changer for me, because during that time when we couldn't teach and couldn't be traveling around the world, my sister, Robin Hood, who's 14 years younger than I.
Of course, you have a sister called Robin Hood. Yeah, yeah.
I do, because our family name is Hood, and I got to name her. She and my niece, Mandy Pretty, they put together our work online. So you can go to learn.ttouch.ca for Canada, and you can get a free introduction to this.
So www.
Yeah, learn.
L-E-R-N
TTouch.
Two T's and then OUCH, TTouch.
Right. .ca.
.ca for Canada. Got it. Okay.
And my sister and Mandy have been putting out these wonderful courses, short courses that you can take online. So besides having practitioners all around where you can see if you can get a TTouch practitioner, you can read one of my books, which are all on Amazon, or you can go to that website and get an introduction. And Rupert, you are always my inspiration. I have to tell you this, the time that I have spent with you and Ileana and the amazing work you do with your horses, it's just been life-changing for me. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it and how much I love coming on and hearing your thinking and your questions and what you bring to the world. And your books. If anybody has not read your book, every book of yours I start and I can't put it down. And I just thank you for gifting the world with your thinking and what you've done.
That's extraordinarily high praise, and I wasn't expecting that. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I remember the first time I heard that you were even interested in our work. We were in Wales, me and Ileana, intensively learning the old master system of dressage and going bopping between there and Portugal and other places on our apprenticeship. And she came and she said, Linda Tellington-Jones has just contacted us and is sort of vaguely interested in horseboy stuff. I'm like, that's extraordinary, because she's in the stratosphere and we are these people grubbing about on the hippie margins. And I've always felt extremely honored and grateful, I have to say, just to know you, let alone to be introduced to the healing methodologies. If somebody wants to do more than learn some techniques for themselves and their horses, and they actually want to become a practitioner of TTouch, what do they need to do?
Well, we're just getting to that point that you can do a lot of it online now. That's the beautiful part. And then we have these workshops, and they're all listed on our website. So, and I'm dropping back and just doing mostly like this online because it's so much fun for me to share and to have we have wonderful practitioners out there who can teach this. And for me, getting to spend time with you and getting to spend time online where we can even reach out, to people who are in Iceland and parts of Africa where they can never get the chance to get to a practitioner.
Linda, you yourself got COVID. Well, how did that inform your practice? How did TTouch help you? Physician heal thyself, that old adage. What insights did you gain from your own experience with it?
Well, what COVID brought to me, when I went into COVID, I have videos of me doing this. It's an exercise where you practice your ability to be flexible. And I was really good. I could get up and down on the floor. I could do all this stuff. And then what I began to discover is I was getting stiffer from not getting out and being with people and doing things.
Okay.
And then for years, I've been really careful about checking my blood levels and making sure that I don't have stuff in my body that I shouldn't have. So I wound up about 4 years ago being diagnosed with Epstein-Barr and with Hashimoto's. And 25 years ago, I got rid of chronic fatigue using the radionics machine and just working with a doctor who just had me on a vegetable diet and worming medicine.
Okay.
Which is really important for all of us. Anybody who eats vegetables or is around animals should be wormed like we worm our animals. And so anyway, through COVID, I found out I was, getting stiffer and slower. That was the downside. And so I have to say more the gifts that it's brought to me because we were doing so much online every Tuesday and one Sunday a month, we practicing taking care of each other. Like people would say, oh my gosh, this arm is in spasm. I can't get to a doctor. I can't get out of spasm. So I could have everybody in the class do this. Just try this. Just put one hand on your arm, move, like cup your hand and move the tissue and just do a slow lift up. And just lift your shoulder a little bit. You hold it and then slowly release it. And feel that, like some of you will feel it, just this little release in it. Because we get so tight sitting at our computers and not having because you had horses, so you never went through that isolation, did you?
No, in fact, weirdly, COVID ended up being one of the busiest times for us because you could stop to the barn to exercise your horses, and then everyone we knew got bored and wanted to buy a horse. And then suddenly all the other work it dried up, but suddenly we were riding instructors because we wanted to do. Yeah, so we were in the forest the whole time. Being in the arena was sometimes allowed, sometimes not allowed. So it was a strangely functional time for us, but I do know that was not everyone else's experience.
Yeah. So what I learned by doing this, just like you and I are, a person could have like one thing with a knee, for instance, bone on bone, couldn't get the surgery, had no one to take care of her when she could have gotten it. And so I just guided her with these little tiny, what we call raccoon touches. And to find out, she was just thinking it was her knee, but it was actually, if you just feel gently where is it painful? And I just had her follow it down and then she found out, oh, wow, that's sore all the way down my leg. And then you go off the area that's sore, and just with the gentlest movements of whatever part of your fingers you can use, it's just like moving the tissue as lightly as possible in this 1 1/4 movement. And it's like connecting into this intelligence, just whatever you want to call it, divine source, universal God intelligence that we are. Every cell. That's been science. That's the science behind that. It's totally proven.
So it's interesting that, you're not saying, okay, well, I'm superhuman because of all this. You've gone through chronic fatigue, you've gone through Epstein-Barr, you've gone through Hashimoto's, and Hashimoto's, as we know, it's a thyroid thing. It's something one lives with rather than gets rid of. But some people present it rather obviously. Some people do not. I would never have thought that. To know you, look at you and see how active and vital you always are. And I'm always astonished that you're getting off planes and dealing with jet lag and doing all this stuff. When you got COVID, you, like quite a lot of people who got COVID, ended up with a sort of a long COVID, but you have also managed to keep traveling. I just met you and I'm talking to you in Jupiter, Florida, but I not so long ago was talking to you in Germany. How has TTouch allowed you to deal with that long COVID? And what of the long COVID do you suffer from? How much of the TTouch do you use to alleviate suffering? And how much do you use for general maintenance? And what's the equation?
Well, the equation here is looking from all sides. What can I do with TTouch with my, when I get anxious and I'm boggy headed, I can do the heart hug and breathe and bring myself into calmness. What's really important, because I'm 85 and this COVID has affected many people much younger than I am in ways that would be later. It affects the hearing. So I'm really paying attention, Rupert, to, what's being said now is that our hearing, or if you have tinnitus, which I've had for about 7 years, that affects our memory. And I was getting really anxious because my memory, I am so usually names and times and places are at my fingertips, but I was losing them. And that was making me really anxious. So it's through this light oxytocin, light contact to activate the oxytocin. And this 1 1/4 circle thing, wait a minute, I can connect into this divine intelligence in my body. And then, but I need way more than that, you all. I went to Costco and I got my hearing tested. And everybody said, oh, come on, Linda, why are you doing that? Because you don't have a problem with hearing. Well, I wasn't aware of it, but when I went and did the COVID testing, which I really recommend, they give you amazing, everybody says it's the best you can get. I had a mild to extreme hearing loss. And they say that's what causes us to lose our memory.
Okay.
So I'm wrestling with that, you all. And also I did a sleep apnea test, because who would ever think that you wouldn't get enough oxygen at night unless you're paying attention? So that can have to do with my Epstein-Barr. So, and I go to integrative doctors and I use all kinds of different ways. I get IV glutathione, which
How often do you do that?
a couple of times, at least once a month, sometimes twice.
Okay. I have a bit of a knowledge of glutathione only because for those of us who've lived with children with autism, there can be, when we had Rowan, my oldest son, who was autistic, tested in the early days for various things, it turned out that he did lack a gene that produced glutathione. And we gave him glutathione, which is, some people may know, it's a chelating agent. It washes, it's a natural product that your body produces to wash toxins and other bad things out of your system. So we would give him glutathione, and then at a certain point, it seemed that we could stop. How long have you been taking glutathione? That's interesting.
Well, I started taking it in liquid form 3 years ago. And I'm going to test for it again because I just found a place where I can get it IV. So I've done 6 of those. And that question is how much you need. I don't know. I mean, I think that when your body's suffering from, Epstein-Barr and long COVID, which we don't know, but today I'm going to be in touch with I have a friend in Germany who's a really wonderful integrative doctor. And she has 2 horses and I trade her support with her horses and she gives me support with all our blood work and, the thinking of how do you affect your body without the drugs.
What I love about this, Linda, is so often when one is talking with people who are practitioners of, let's say, alternative health, there's often a feeling, I think, among them that they have to present themselves as shining examples of perfect health. Otherwise, people won't believe in what they do. They'll be like, well, you're sick, so how can your stuff? But what I love is that you can wear this on your sleeve and say, no, I get sick like anybody else. I get the same things that other people do. But I've got this busy work schedule. I kind of have to keep going. I have to keep getting on planes. When up until a couple of years ago, listeners, Linda was living in Hawaii, but, spending half the year touring Europe. I don't know how you did the jet lag and the exhaustion.
I'm flying.
Yeah. But yet there you are sort of showing, look, if you manage yourself, yes, you can get these things. These things are sort of natural things to get, but it doesn't have to stop you and it doesn't have to impair your quality of life.
Well, that is the question. And I think it's why we need to talk about these because there are days when I'm really foggy and what they've discovered now recently, there have been big conferences in Germany with the integrative doctors finding out that there are protein strands apparently in the blood of people with long COVID. So I want to know if I can be tested for that because I'd love to know. Because if you know that, then you can start using the energy and talking about how we can affect, the light in ourselves, bringing light into the fogginess in the head and talking to other friends who have it and manage to keep going. That's my question.
It's interesting. What springs to mind is, I forget where they did this study. You read these studies, but it was a study on monks and nuns, I think Christian monks and nuns, who were very old, who didn't appear to be suffering the effects of dementia or Alzheimer's, etc. But when they looked at their brains, the same brain shrinkage and the same apparent brain degradation had happened. Yet they were not really showing much that was symptomatic. But yet there they were, engaging with nature, working in the gardens, leading a very spiritual life, leading a very actualized life, at least on their terms, connected in a community, strong connection with the divine, strong intellectual life. And what was interesting is that on paper, they had the same issues to the same extent that people with a grossly deteriorated quality of life had, yet they did not have this grossly deteriorated quality of life. And I find this fascinating. And there seems to be a parallel there with what you're talking about, that you can have, no one would look at you. I'm looking at you right now. The listeners can't see you, but I do not see somebody, or nor am I hearing somebody who I would describe in any degree as foggy. But there you are saying, well, Ru, there are days when I am. I love this honesty because it gives us faith that we could manage ourselves too.
Well, I think, and for me, having this concept that I can put my own hand, melt my hands on my body, and we didn't talk about how we've named the different parts of the hands that we use to make this 1 1/4 circle. We've given them animal names. But you see, during COVID, there were 2 interesting things that came up for me. It was said that there's a real happening of what's called feeling deficit syndrome, that people weren't feeling themselves, weren't feeling their bodies because we don't shake hands, the hugging, all that mingling. And the other thing it said was that nature deficit syndrome.
Yeah.
For those who weren't having horses, they could go out or couldn't walk their dog or didn't walk their dog. stuck inside. But for me, it's also, I don't know what you just said about the nuns being in the community. I had what they call a mini stroke, which is actually TIA. I had it on.
What does TIA stand for?
Oh, I forget the word. I don't know.
We'll look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a word I should memorize, and I can't remember it. But it's a warning for a stroke. And the thing is, there was no clotting and no bleeding. They don't know what caused it, which is it. But to me, it was a wake up call. So that's when I said, okay, man, I'm getting my ears tested. I'm getting my sleep apnea, and I'm just waiting. And I've been talking to quite a few friends I found out who have these CPAP thing. And because when they tested me, Rupert, I told you this before, I was found during the night to have like many episodes of only 68% oxygen. And the thing that is so wild is that I woke up with dreams like 5-6 years ago in Hawaii. I kept waking up and I said to Roland, I have to get more oxygen. And I tried to rent an oxygen machine, but you have to have a doctor and you have to know what you're doing. And it's very expensive if you don't have insurance or have a doctor's prescription. So finally, I'm waiting here for this CPAP. And when I say foggy, I don't know what that means. It's sometimes I feel like I'm not in my body, and that's when I can use TTouch. But as soon as I start talking to you and I think of all the people that we're reaching, talking, then I get clear and I'm connected. It's like I'm connected into that oneness of all. So I have the feeling of the community and this connection to all of us. And so my sister came for 2 weeks, and I have another sister here now for another 2 weeks. And I need friends around me, because this is one of the things that they say is you get isolated, when you have a stroke or you have something like this and you're not as
useful. Good. Does that mean I can invite myself with my rambunctious children to come and disrupt your life in Florida?
Well, I'd love to have you when we get our guest house built. But you and Liliana, we have room for you without the children. When we get the guest house built, now they can come down our slide, because we have a pool with a slide.
Ooh.
And it was built for 2 children.
Okay. I can supply. Listen, Linda, here's my request. We're right at 2.5 hours here, and there's so much more I want to talk to you about. As I said before when we're doing our preamble, we have another podcast, which is Equine Assisted World. And obviously you have been in this world and a pioneer in this world for the longest time. Now we have sort of the history of how you became you and what you do. Would you do us the honor of coming on to Equine Assisted World in the next week or two and talking to us in more depth? We can, because as you say, we didn't get into the different parts of the hand. We've barely touched on what TTouch is. We've really just said that it exists and given some people an idea of a first contact. But I think we'd be doing listeners a disservice if we didn't, when I'm out there training horseboy method, for example, I'm always saying, have you discovered TTouch? And there's always a percentage of people that go, oh yes, absolutely. And then there's people, of course, who say, oh, what's that? And it's always my great pleasure to say, it's a thing you should know. So would you please come on again and we can go into more depth?
Rupert, it's such an honor and a pleasure for me to spend time with you. I love your questions always. But I have to tell you, I have a lot of books here, and so many people have influenced my books, but the books that stand out in my mind that cannot put this book down were your books.
You are.
And the Long Ride Home. Holy moly, all of your experiences, but it's the way you express yourself. Listeners, you have to get those books. I mean, your courage, but your wordsmith. I'm a wordsmith. I just love words, and the way you use it's like nobody I know, Rupert.
Thank you.
Get emotion in these words that you put. It just jumps out of the page at me.
Thank you. Speaking of books, if people were to pick up a book by you got 22 of them, where should they start? What's the book that they should pick up to understand you and your work, at least as a beginning step?
Well, maybe my latest, it depends if they're into horses or dogs. My latest horse book I wrote with my married.
What is this one?
This is called Training and Retraining the Tellington Way.
Okay. Training and Retraining Horses the Tellington Way. Very good. And people can find that on Amazon.
Right.
And then if they're into dogs, what should they read?
Into dogs. Where's my dog book? I get the exact title. I've got the legal clear. So it's getting in TTouch with your dog.
TTouch with your dog.
Getting in TTouch with your dog.
Getting in TTouch with your dog. Getting in TTouch with your dog.
Right. And
Okay.
if they're into human, it's TTouch for health care.
TTouch for healthcare. So if you're just into this for a human point of view, TTouch for healthcare.
Right.
Perfect. And let's just give people your URL again, your website again.
Yes. To get the classes, you go to learn.ttouch.ca.
www.learn.ttouch.ca.
Yes.
Got it.
Right.
Okay. All right, Linda. Thank you. I must go. I have someone who's in the saddle who'll be expecting me there in 15 minutes. I've got to jump in the car and go. Otherwise, I'll be cross. I cannot thank you enough for this. It's been such a treat. I know our listeners will feel the same. And I can't wait to have you back on for Equine Assisted World to go deeper into TTouch and how it works.
I look forward to it. And I look forward to sharing the stuff I did for years before there was ever an association.
All right. Let's do it. See you soon. Okay.
Much love.
Much love. Bye-bye.
Aloha.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Join our website, newtrailslearning.com, to check out our online courses and live workshops in Horseboy Method, Movement Method, and Athena. These evidence-based programs have helped children, veterans, and people dealing with trauma around the world. We also offer a horse training program and self-care program for riders on longridehome.com. These include easy-to-do online courses and tutorials that bring you and your horse joy. For an overview of all shows and programs, go to rupertisaacson.com. See you on the next show. And please remember to press subscribe and share.